So we have a very fine panel here to discuss this very important topic. And I might give a warning to you. Last year, a lot of the discussion obviously was on safety management systems, and this panel is not necessarily oriented that way. I know a lot of discussion was on that, but we think it's important to discuss the very root of the issue for the future regulatory model. Many of us have different perspectives, different definitions of what a safety management system might be. And I didn't want our discussion to be clouded on our own personal definitions of what that might be. I think it's important to go back to the basics of what we are looking at for an appropriate regulatory oversight model. As you know, this past year, at least here in the States, it's been very challenging. We have been under fire a bit politically because the political establishment puts pressure on us as regulators to be everywhere all the time. And we know that that's not realistic. In fact, doing more inspection is not necessarily the answer as doing more efficient and smarter inspection and oversight. And in that context, I'd like some of our discussion to be centered on how can we have a regulatory oversight model that is smarter and more efficient. As you know, we as aviation professionals have found that there's great value in the voluntary disclosure programs, the perspective of working collaboratively with industry, at the same time maintaining that appropriate balance of enforcement. We find that the regulatory model is a very fragile model, actually, very fragile in maintaining the appropriate balance between collaborative leadership toward safety and enforcement. We've also found that the regulatory oversight model is something that is important for the future as we look at the application of data and how we become more proactive versus reactive. We get a lot of questions and concerns posed on us about the pressures of the industry, that the internet, with the purchasing power of the private individual buying tickets, that at the lowest price create industry to come up with some interesting business models. The aviation industry is rapidly changing because of these model changes and new technology. We as regulators are having a difficult time keeping up. And that's why we're working toward regulatory models we think have more transparency on the actual certificate holders in the industry, being transparent with their data, being transparent with their safety oversight processes, so we as regulators can be better served and as hunters for risk and for hazards and not as gatherers of data. We also have the perspective with oversight models that we as regulators want to work collaboratively, but we do have the pressure from the public. The public requires, as we've seen from the Wall Street issues, also from the issues brought up during the panel, that they want a very strong regulator, strong overseer, as you will. We know that it's not that easy, that it's a very, very difficult role that we as regulators have. And so therefore, we have to be more intelligent on what kind of model we propose. And there are a lot of answers already available. It's how we organize ourselves, how we structure ourselves, and how we communicate our role. We find the communication aspect is the most difficult one. So yes, we do look at the possibilities of safety management systems, but to do it intelligently, we have to go back to discuss what are the basic tenets of the future oversight model that we must adhere to, that we must incorporate, and to leverage those things that we already have ongoing right now. So, is SMS the answer? I don't know. I think that this argument of a new oversight model or a future oversight model, it's worthwhile to look at other industries. I myself have been looking at the entertainment industry in the state of Florida. How many of you have gone to Disney World in Florida or to Busch Gardens? Okay, a few of you who are being honest. But if you've gone to Florida, you notice that there are some major amusement rides. There is the Disney and Busch Gardens and SeaWorld. I have it on good authority that the state of Florida actually has fewer on-site safety inspectors of those major rides because they have very vibrant safety departments that are transparent with their data, that they work very closely with the state. but there are more inspectors applied to those small amusement rides that pop up in fairground parks, into mall parking lots, and that the inspectors are more hands-on there and shut the rides down to make sure that they weld the appropriate equipment and that they provide more direct hands-on supervision to those higher risk areas. So it's a better application of personnel. And I think for the oversight model of the future, when I talk about we can't be everywhere all the time, we have to look at where do we place our resources in the most appropriate place. And when we talk about resources, are they simply inspectors? Or are there other types of folks that have extra skill sets that can better leverage the inspectors? Talking about analysts and other safety professionals that help the inspectors do their job as well. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and actually a fairly complicated, complex, and fragile issue that does warrant the discussion that we hope to have today. So to kick things off, I'll start with the first question to each panel member to have them provide their perspective on what they feel is appropriate for an oversight model of the future. As a reminder, there is, or was, I thought, a way that you could email questions and text questions that could be provided to us if you are, is it up there? Oh, there it is, good. So there is an address that you can text or email, or if you want to do it the good old-fashioned way and stand up and be reckoned with, then we'll be happy to take your questions as well. And we don't have a shortage of questions, but we'd still be happy to entertain yours in particular. Okay, so starting off with the question to Henry, as I said before, Henry, and to each member, could you please provide us, the audience, your aspect of a future oversight model?
Thank you, John. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Not much time to cover that big question. I'd like to give you a little bit of an answer to that point in the perspective of ICAO, who's currently carrying out audits of contracting states, of which currently it's oversight audits, cyclic, meaning to carry out 190 states in a 6-year cycle. Okay, I'll try it like this. Currently, as perhaps states are doing to their certificate holders, are carrying out audits or inspections every cyclic. It could be based on an inspection plan or an audit plan. What we are looking for in the future is to move out of a cyclic audits, and now we want to start looking at what we call continuous monitoring. So we want to start looking at a methodology where we can monitor all states continuously. We envisage, because we have principles which we all have to adhere to when we're carrying out audits, and we are going to maintain the same principles, and those are fairness and universality and transparency to various degrees. While maintaining the same principles, we believe that we could go to a continuous monitoring role. In other words, all states will be monitored equally and in the same manner, except still using a risk-based approach as well. Some states would be able to get more focus from ICAO in the form of specific purpose audits to various subjects, or a full-blown audit as they've been getting to date under the comprehensive systems approach, which addressed 16 of the 18 annexes. Now, one element as well that we're looking at as we're all talking today about oversight, we're wanting to raise that one other level. We're looking at now perhaps measuring a state's safety performance. So it's not just as opposed to just oversight on a continuous basis. Safety performance does include oversight. It includes regulatory compliance, but it also includes the state's safety performance, as it's titled, with accidents and serious incident rates. In addition, we're keeping in mind as well that ICAO is drafting new requirements for states to establish a state safety program, an SSP, and this should be coming out for next year. So as we've seen that ICAO has come out with provisions and on SMS, and of course states have come out with regulations for the industry, in SMS, particularly in air navigation services, or ATM and aerodromes, and now we're seeing in flight operations, but it is being expanded to manufacturing organizations, design organizations, and training organizations as well, future. But I don't want to talk about SMS, but the point is, it's not just ICAO and regulators talking the talk, they have to walk it as well. So we're looking at a state. The regulator must develop a state safety program. Now, that program that would allow a state through its processes to identify or map top-level safety concerns. Now, under this continuous monitoring role, the biggest challenge, of course, is sharing of data. We have to recognize there are other entities carrying out oversight. Of course, we have, even in ICAO itself, it's a challenge, because we have cost cap programs, we have the Technical Cooperation Bureau, we have regional offices performing various activities as well, and that in themselves, all of us have to share data. But we also have regional safety oversight organizations. Now, we've been promoting this. It is a way to go move in the future of pooling resources because of the big concerns that we have industry-wide of shortages of personnel, et cetera. The international organizations, the EC, EASA, Eurocontrol, IATA, we already have agreements, but it's a matter of expanding these agreements now when we're looking at this concept of continuous monitoring. In other words, where other recognized agencies or organizations are performing oversight activities, share the data and give credit to the data, as opposed to keep going cyclic audits or inspections one after another without giving credit for this type of data. Thanks.
I'll bring it up. Thanks, Henry. Appreciate that. Excellent words. And now for Bill, same question.
I'll approach this question from the standpoint of the work we did back during the summer, looking at the FAA, and the four people with whom I hung out on that were really a bunch of interesting personalities, and we wound up getting philosophical about safety oversight in some respects. So permit me to kind of use that approach for a minute. So who's that monitor here? I'd say when you look at the challenge of regulatory oversight in today's environment and how it goes forth as far as the global aviation community, there's some things we have to think about. The FAA and a regulatory body of most kinds provide services, so like air traffic management, flight services and such, and they provide obligations. And all the FARs are, for 121.91, 135 repair stations, whatever, are essentially obligations put on the regulated entities, as they call them. So the regulated entity, whether it's an airline or a repair station, corporate flight department, whatever, owns the responsibility to comply with those obligations. The regulated entity's job is to oversee that compliance. And there you get into interesting questions about, are you more enforcement-oriented, or are you more collaborative-oriented? And we can get into that during this discussion here. But the challenge becomes one of, what is the value added of a oversight model in an aviation community that's increasingly got a very good safety culture among the players and has increasingly good safety results? So where does that oversight model fit in that thing? Does it continue to look at, from a forensic standpoint, on incidents and accidents in an environment where there are so few of those anymore that you really can't get decent trend and data out of that? And on the other hand, does it then provide, from a more collaborative standpoint, ways to find precursors for things that could happen? And how do you do that? How does the model add value to that discussion? And so when you get right down to it, the people in the FAA have a very interesting challenge right now, whether it's Part 121 with the airlines or in others, but particularly with the airlines. How do you have an interaction with your regulated entity who owns the responsibility to comply with all the obligations, to run a safe airline, and at the same time provide a facilitation point so that people are able to look more and more at these precursors? And that's an area where the voluntary self-disclosure programs really come in. So the whole area from ASAP programs, FOCRA programs, and the institutional airline programs are a big part of how you do that. One of the things that's always been part of how I managed with my people is when you're out looking for things, look for ugly. Don't just corroborate the fact that everything seems to be good, but look for the things that are ugly that you can find and fix. And if you can do that in a self-disclosure program way where you're able to protect the people who are making the self-disclosures, you have a much better chance of actually finding those things and making those things fixed. So you then become in this little situation of, am I regulating, am I overseeing day-to-day activities, or am I structuring myself within the regulated body, the FAA? Am I structuring myself in a way where I can better play in the white spaces within my organization and within the industry that nobody's looking at today? A lot of data presently comes into the FAA through these self-disclosure programs, but they would say that they are still along a very long journey in progress to make that what it needs to be. And a very big part of that is the analytics. All this data comes in and it goes into someplace. The analytics give you a couple of different things. One is a very good trend analysis that you can then share with the regulated entities, with the airlines or the repair stations. And number two, it gives you an idea, if you're really looking at this stuff, how many repeat disclosures are you getting that you didn't realize, that people are actually getting away with disclosing something and using it as a get out of jail free card. And I would say the FAA, from our perspective for the work we did during the summer, has a ways to go yet to capture that and then promulgating it back out to the community. So when we look at the oversight model as we get into this, that's an area that I'd like to pursue a little bit more, John. Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. For those of you who just came in, the question that we're asking each of our panelists is to give at first their personal aspect on what they think is important as far as a future safety oversight model. And so the next is Michael Bryan.
Right. Thanks very much, John. IATA, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the trade association of the world's airlines, 231 member airlines. And like many of us, our number one priority is safety. In recent years, we've become far more proactive in leading safety initiatives around the world. And two that I'd like to touch on are our two safety audit programs. And I'd then like to identify how they can contribute to the safety oversight model of the future. The first one is the longer established program, which is IOSA, the IATA Operational Safety Audit Program. This was launched back in 2003. It's based upon a very strong set of standards, operational safety standards drawn primarily from all of the airline-related provisions of Annexes 1, 6, and 8. Other requirements, some of the DoD audit program requirements, other regulatory environment, industry best practices, all of these were built in to produce a very robust and globally applicable set of safety audit standards. The audit itself that takes place, of course, is just the ultimate verification of conformity with those standards. The success that we've had with the program has been quite intense. It was made mandatory for all of IATA member airlines, so they have all been audited at least once, some several times, because the audit takes place every 2 years. The aim of the program was very simple: to improve operational safety, and also to cut back on the number of redundant co-chair safety audits that were taking place in the industry. And we believe we're achieving success in both of those categories. The first one is a little difficult to draw a direct correlation between safety performance and an IOSA audit. But we've had many anecdotal tales, at least, of airlines saying that their conformity to the IOSA standards has provided them a much better platform to perform and to operate more safely. Certainly on the second point, IOSA audit results are being used enormously by airlines in place of doing their own audits. That places an enormous responsibility on IATA as managers and coordinators and quality assurers of the program, because these audit results are being used as if the airline had done its own audit. Now, the other thing that is starting to grow of much more importance is the use and potential use of these audit results by regulators. The audit results of an airline contain a vast amount of information. There's over 900 standards that are audited. The audit report itself is very comprehensive because it includes the full checklist, what the standard was, what the findings were, the corrective action that was undertaken by the airline, and the verification of that corrective action by the audit organisation. So there's a lot of valuable information in an IOSA audit report. Those of you who are at the 35th Assembly will remember that the resolution on safety oversight encouraged states to make use of all available safety data, such as that from IOSA audit reports, in the execution of their safety oversight responsibilities. So that really provides an interesting platform for regulators to make more use of IOSA audit data. Some states have actually gone a very interesting path, and they have mandated IOSA audits for airlines either operating in their country or into it. Now, that by no means that they're giving up their own oversight responsibilities, but they're smart enough to realise that the data that can come from these audit reports is very useful to them. So they have, in fact, taken that step of mandating it. Other states just turn to the IOSA registry, which is a public listing on our website, when they're making determinations of approvals for foreign operators coming into their country. We've recently been audited by EASA. We had a team from EASA with us for 2 days, because they themselves are looking to use IOSA audit results when they take on the responsibility in 2010 for approving third country operators into the EU. So the potential is really there for a great use to be made by regulators in their oversight model of the future. On the ground handling side, this is another interesting area, and another area where regulators can take great advantage, we believe. There's very little guidance from ICAO in the field of ground ramp operations, yet we all know that there's a problem. From the airline perspective, we know full well that it costs us at least $4 billion a year in physical damage. Additional costs in terms of loss of use of the aeroplane, rescheduling flights, etc., can produce enormous multiplying factors. There's also potential flight safety issues, and there's personnel injuries and deaths that result from poor performance on the ramp. So we have come up with the IATA Safety Audit for Ground Ops program, which again has developed a very strong set of operational safety standards meant to be globally applicable, irrespective of the size of the ground handler operation. And we have actually started this program now. So yet again, we have intense interest from regulators and from airport authorities. They all want the same result as we do: improved safety performance. If we can get improved safety performance from an industry-led program without enacting additional regulation, and who was it this morning that said we have 30,000 regulations or something? We don't need additional regulations. We need improved safety performance. So that's why there is very strong interest from the regulatory community in ISAGO as well. So that's what we put on the table from the IATA perspective, is that these safety audit programs are available to assist in shaping the oversight model of the future. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Excellent words. And now Basil Burimo.
Thank you. And let me bring us back now to the U.S. airline perspective. And you know, I'll be honest with you. We sit back and we're here today talking about the future oversight model and what it looks like. Well, I'm convinced that the model that we have today has delivered some pretty good results. And it's hard to sit around and say the system doesn't work when we're enjoying the safest period in aviation. So something is going right. Having said that, we'll be the first to acknowledge that there's room for improvement. When we talk about what the oversight model of the future should look like, I mean, certain things come to mind. It should be flexible, not unlike your amusement park analogy, where certain operations require more oversight, others have more internal capability and are able to do more. And I think the FAA, the oversight body, should be able to tailor their approach so that it makes sense. So flexibility is key. I heard this morning the word collaborative mentioned several times. And let me tell you, 8 months ago, inside the Beltway here in Washington, I mean, if you said collaborative, it could be a career-limiting move for you. I mean, it was just something that you couldn't say. But a handful of us, at the FAA and in the industry said, no, you have to have a collaborative relationship. It's part of what makes this so successful. So that still has to play a role. But there also has to be the ability internally within the regulator to know where the line between collaborative and coziness is, and stop short of moving into the cozy relationship and abrogating the regulatory responsibility. So it's important that the regulating body knows where that line is and is able to manage that internally. And then we've talked about data-driven. You've got to rely on data. There's a session tomorrow on data and how we manage it. We focused a lot on collecting data. I think we need to focus more on using data and actually driving some changes as a result of the data. And then I think finally it's a mix of the analytics and the observation. One of the criticisms of our system in the U.S. Back in the spring, when there was a lot of attention on this issue, was that inspectors weren't out in the field, they weren't kicking tires, they weren't on the airplanes, and that's a key part of any oversight model is making sure that not only that the systems are in place up front, but that the execution is happening at the where the rubber meets the tarmac. So I mean those are the things we look for in an oversight model, and they're not a lot different from what we see today, but clearly there's some things we can do to make the system a little more robust, allow it to stand up against some criticisms from outside, and I think that's part of why we're here today, talking about the changes that we make to make us better. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say we need a whole new model, because we're sitting here today in the safest period of aviation, and I don't attribute that to luck.
Thanks, Basil. And now Salkan Jerry.
Thank you. It's after lunch and I'm the last one to speak. It's making it difficult to add value to this conversation. Without adding to or repeat exactly what everybody's been saying, and as the Honorable Bob Struggle and the acting administrator started, a bar of soap in a toilet is more lethal than traveling on an aircraft. It's true, but one aircraft accident is enough to attract more attention and really has a major impact. Therefore, I believe that oversight tools and SMS are the best approach towards tackling the issue of addressing the safety risk that led to such an accident. However, I like the word that John Allen started, a SMART model of safety oversight, and the current ICAO model of oversight on the regulator really tackles the regulator and critical elements, making sure that the law, the regulation, the procedures, the guidance, the resources, the manpower are sufficient enough to conduct safety oversight, which is a very good approach, no doubt about it. But I think there should be we should take one step further or one step lower, and to make sure that the industry has a similar tool to actually address the safety risk. My understanding of how can I have a more effective future safety oversight model would be is to actually measure the effectiveness of that model, of that oversight, and to be able to say that the oversight conducted actually was a successful one and managed to highlight the safety risk and the discrepancy within the system. The industry is way ahead in terms of safety because I'm talking on the regulator point of view here. Similar to what Mark O'Brien mentioned, the IOSA, and I believe there's another program for ground handling that has been introduced. Yeah, basically this is an industry taking initiative to actually address safety risk that the regulatory bodies do in a way have not taken a very proactive approach, and the industry is really taking the matter on their hand, and they're addressing the issue because we as regulator, we come up with rules and regulation, but it's the industry that actually implement it, and they are the best one to actually tell us whether it is actually working or it's not working, and what are the areas of concern. So I believe that the current tools are available, again, as Henry Gorgi said, they are cyclic and not continuous. And we need to have a continuous system, and we need to really have three elements, or address three elements, in my belief, is that we need to address the resources that are available at the areas of safety risk, and what are the resources in that areas, and we should channel the resources towards covering those you can say the holes within the cheese. The other part is training of the inspectors who actually conduct the safety oversight, and how effective and how skillful they are in performing the safety oversight. And lastly but not least, basically, is the how you actually utilize the data. Now, it's good that IATA has opened its data system to all regulators to actually utilize in conducting oversight, but it's how the authority would actually use that data and how to properly share it and make sure that it's not a punitive system. When you find out there is a deficiency within an industry, within one of your operator, you actually take a punitive approach and rather trying to resolve the problem. So there is a very thin line between enforcement and actually collaborative approach. I think this is what I have to add. As I said, it's difficult at the end.
Thank you, Oz. Excellent. And before we go off into other things, we already have one question from the audience. It's a very good question, very thought-provoking, and international in tenor, which is important, obviously, so we don't become too parochial on the FAA issues. The question is, should an operator be able to choose its regulator? And what I mean by that, the background, that's right, have gun will travel. In light of increasing economic liberalism, how does the regulatory system normally funded by the operator, no, it's not that way in the States, but in other areas of the world, some funding of the regulatory system does come from the operators. So how do they ensure that they are not subject to negotiation, held hostage by the funds they receive from those that they regulate? And we discussed this, and we can also extrapolate that issue to those to be regulated shopping for the regulator, to find the regulator that will cost them the less pain, if you will. Now, that happens in the United States, but it also can happen internationally, and also in this context, what this might mean if you have global mergers of air carriers or enterprises in various countries who will be the regulator and who will have the authority to promulgate enforcement on those certificate holders. Anybody up here want to take a crack at that one? Yeah, jump right at it.
Yeah, I'll say a couple words on that. Again, relating back to the study we did, when you're talking about shopping, it's not a uncommon happening to have people, whether it's the general aviation level with business aviation, or ACOs, airworthiness certificate offices, to have that problem where people have a different perspective. Sometimes, like when I was in DuPont, we actually had airplanes in a number of different locations, but they were all under the Houston Flight Standards District Office. When we divested Conoco, we reverted to the Philly FSDO. There was a distinct difference between the Houston FSDO and the Philly FSDO as far as requirements went. So we had to adjust to that. We found during the study there are times when one certificate management office for an airline will look at the same airline or the same airplane differently than another airline's CMO. So you could have 3 airlines at Chicago O'Hare waiting to take off, and you have some kind of weather problems or icing or ice pellets or something like that. One airline can go in conformance with its CMO, and the other 2 airlines have to sit on the ground. So that is a challenge, and I think as we get into more and more of an international aviation community, and there may be through mergers or whatever, that will just be exacerbated as far as, you know, who do you want to be associated with so you can get the best out of that. I think, however, when you go back to the basic idea that you, as the regulated body, the airline, own the responsibility to meet the obligations that the FAA imposes and all the aircraft and airline regulations you have, that's got to be the basic thing that you worry about. When we were looking at we visited 10 different airlines, and there were a couple airlines, 2 or 3 airlines that really impressed us as far as their safety management system. They operated as if there were no FAA. And everything they did was pretty much proactive before the FAA ever got a chance to do anything with them. Their relationships with their inspectors were very good, but they operated from a very almost pure standpoint. That's going to be a challenge from an international perspective. When you look at the societal differences between a developed country and a developing country, there are things that we take for granted in the developed countries around the institutional systems that engender trust that are still works in progress as far as other countries. That has a material impact on the safety culture, and that's something that will be part of an oversight model, I think, that has to be tackled by a collection of regulated bodies, FAA, EASA, whatever. So there's some degree of consistency among the regulators that enables to have the regulated entities to have an easier time with it.
I might add just from my own 2 cents worth that I think it speaks to the need for harmonization so that there is standardization, just as we're striving within our own organization, the FAA, to have all of our offices standardized. And that means clear guidance, easily understood guidance that we can understand and harmonize and standardize our processes. It also speaks to the issue of our inherent governmental responsibilities as an oversight entity. And what I mean by that, I know in our oversight role is 2 pieces to it. There's one that the public expects, as I said before, that is to be the watchdog, if you will, the firm regulator who is maintaining that standard level, at least minimum level of a playing field for people who want to engage in the airspace and commerce. And they expect that we will be doing that oversight to maintain a safe environment. The other part, though, is a service that we provide. This is certification and certificate management. And sometimes inspectors have a hard time figuring out which side, which part they play. And so it's important, I believe, that that part that is service rendering, whether it be certification or certificate management, could be compensated for by those that they oversee, because a price to pay to play into the environment. But that part that is inherently governmental in nature in terms of the surveillance and oversight and possibly enforcement, it may not be best that those regulated fund that part, that comes from government funding and things like that. No, I know that various states have different mechanisms, and so the system has to be adaptable based on the abilities of that state to fund an oversight posture. But I'd say in terms of being objective and in their role, that part that's inherently governmental might be looked at as not being funded by those that are regulated. It's just a personal perspective on that. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Just a quick comment, John. And in fact, it's going to lead to a question to Henry, actually. You know, from the overall international perspective, I think we could probably say that there are still some states that are offering flags of convenience, shall we say, issuing AOCs and not offering really no safety, no oversight at all. I know that ICAO has taken recent steps to try and minimise that possibility. Could you explain a little bit about that, Henry? I know it's not your direct area, but I know it's something that's of interest to everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Yes, ICAO is not an authority, so it's not an enforcement agency or anything like that. However, as you may know, that the audit program, when it all started its initial inception in 1999, there was limited transparency, and today we are seeing that in the audit program we have full transparency in the aspect that today, when a state is audited, all its results, the whole report, all the information, all the state's comments are shared and available to other contracting states. In addition, some of the information is also now available to the public, and this was voted by all its member states. So we don't have an enforcement role, but we do put the pressure of transparency for one. Now, having said this, we've also brought in, now that when we're conducting audits, there is always a concern is, well, what happens if an auditor determines something that is significant, a significant safety concern? Now, ICAO, yes, has a formal definition, and essentially a certificate holder that does not meet the international provisions set forth in the annex provisions or the state's regulations. Or in layman's terms, I would say, is when the hair in the back of your neck goes up, you have a significant safety concern. ICAO now has a process where when they conduct an audit, these significant concerns, and that is an example like issuing of an AOC to an operator without any justification or limited justification, those significant concerns would be published on the web immediately. A state is only given 2 weeks to respond and to try to resolve it, otherwise it gets published. And it's made available to all other contracting states. Now, other states can react. Other states have a sovereign right. All states have a right, have a responsibility to its citizens, as it's called for in the convention as well. So they have to protect their own citizens. They should be reviewing these reports that are available. So when a significant safety concern gets posted by ICAO, basically indicating that an AOC has been issued or the state has issued a certain amount of AOCs without any justification, if you know that particular carrier of that particular state is flying into your state, that regulator should be asking questions. They have an obligation to do so to their own public. In addition, ICAO also there is an article in the convention, Article 54J, which allows ICAO to where a state is not meeting its obligations set forth in the convention, they can go to council, and if council may rule this, and then notify all states accordingly that this state is not meeting its obligations. And that hasn't happened yet. What we do find is the tool, the mechanism of having transparency and publishing significant safety concerns, for example, has gone a long way, a positive way. Those states, we have, currently there is 6 states, potentially up to 8, but right now there are 6 with significant safety concerns published on the web, and those states, majority of them, are aggressively trying to resolve those deficiencies. So that process works.
Yeah. Thanks, Henry. So we've been talking for a while here, and I thought I'd take a break to give you all a chance. If there are any questions out there for us, then we have other questions up here. There's a microphone for you so all can hear.
Okay, my question is directed to Mike from IATA. Now, he talked a lot about the IOSA audit and how it's available to state regulators. But it's very difficult to get these audit reports. I requested the audit report from an operator that was audited, the IOSA audit report, and I was told by that operator, this report belongs to IATA. You need to go to IATA to get the report. I contacted IATA to get a report, and I'm told, this report is confidential. We need the permission of the operator to release that to you. I believe if you want to share safety information, as a matter of courtesy, when IATA does a report on IOSA audit of an operator, they should make a copy of that report available to the state regulatory body. So to come here, Mike, and say it's available, it's not that easy. You have to go through a myriad of bureaucracy to get that report, and that's reality.
Right, thanks for the question. Yeah, look, we're already looking at those processes. The actual, for those of you who are interested, and this applies also to airlines or any agency requesting an IOSA audit report. If you go on the IOSA website, there is a thing saying request audit report. And yes, you do have to go through a formal application. We verify as far as possible the identity of the applicant. We ask the airline for formal release. Then the party to whom the report is released signs a non-disclosure agreement, and then the report is issued on a password-protected CD with the password conveyed separately. Now, the reason that we take all of those relatively extraordinary security measures is because the information in an IOSA audit report of an airline is very interesting, shall we say, potentially. And of course, it has significant commercial implications as well, too. So when we set up this program, our members were very insistent that we put these security measures in place. The idea that you've just raised of possibly making the report available to the regulator of the state in which the airline is based is something that we should very much look at. We could, in fact, build it into the audit agreement that the airline, when it signs up for an audit, actually agrees that that report can be released to the regulator. There are other steps we have to take as well. Some regulators, the one in this country in particular, cannot actually acquire the report at any stage. Otherwise, it becomes subject to freedom of information. So they view the reports but do not actually acquire them. So we have to keep those mechanisms in place. But certainly, I take your general point about the accessibility of the audit reports. We already have mechanisms in place to improve that, but we need to keep the security points in place as well. Thanks.
Sir, I have a quick question. It seems like the safety audits and especially the IOSA audits look very much at the entity involved, the certificate holder, but they don't expand themselves to their relationship with their stakeholders. And although I see these safety audits like the IOSA audit will come in, and what it'll do is it'll show how good somebody is at paper whipping something, but it really won't show them how good they are at exercising good leadership with your stakeholders. If you're going to have an oversight program for safety, you're going to have to exercise some kind of good, positive leadership, like the skipper of a ship would, with all the members, and that includes your pilots and your flight attendants and all those other stakeholders for these voluntary reporting programs. Because if you don't have that leadership in place, you're not going to have the visibility to the safety issues that you want to manage in the first place. And it seems to me that to come in and audit the audit the ability of somebody to generate paperwork doesn't necessarily capture the entire scope of an entity's responsibility to comply with an obligation to ensure safety.
Yeah, it's a good
Wanted to hear your
point.
thoughts.
Yeah, it's certainly one that we acknowledge. It's a point that's been raised before, that the IOSA audit is too documentation oriented and doesn't allow enough time, in fact, for the auditors to verify implementation of the standards. This is something that we are working on right now. We're starting in the key areas of flight operations, flight dispatch, and maintenance. To recraft the standards to enable the auditors to be more involved with the verification of implementation. The other thing that we're looking at as well too, and this is really quite a new concept for us, we had an IOSA summit at the end of September, building on 5 years of experience. And much like what Henry was talking about in terms of moving towards a risk-based monitoring program, we are going to start looking at how we manage IOSA audit reports in future. An IOSA registered airline must be audited every 2 years in order to maintain its registration. The audit at the moment, every renewal audit, is exactly the same as the first one in concept. The standards change a little bit sometimes, but do we need to keep doing that every time, or should we become more risk oriented and maybe just focus on implementation or focus on particular areas of an airline operation during a renewal audit? So these are all things that we're looking at. We still believe IOSA is a great program. It's under constant review and improvement.
Any other? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is again Lubanga from Kenya. I just wanted again to comment on the IOSA program. First of all, I'd like to know from ICAO whether they recognize it. Personally, I know the program itself is very good. I know the details of what they do because I used to work for IATA for quite a number of years. And when they were implementing it in Africa, I was also a party to it. However, there are concerns about the IOSA audit. It's bringing confusion. Whether it can be recognized by the regulators. And then number two, we know of cases 1 or 2 where an airline has been IOSA certified, but we know this airline should not have been. We also know that EASA doesn't up to now recognize IOSA certification because of such problems. So also a question to pose to IATA whether the auditors or the inspectors who come to do these audits are actually qualified or are trained or are just professionals they pick from outside to come and do it for them, and whether they vet them, because it's very serious when somebody gives you a good bill of health when you're not healthy, because you'll fly thinking that you are safe when actually you're not safe. And I think I would like to know whether IATA does vet its inspectors, because I know when I was with IATA, one of my colleagues who was not an inspector used to go and do these inspections. And I think maybe then it was very early, I don't know. But whether now they have the inspectors who, when you get a certificate, you can be sure that you are healthy. I would like to know this. That's all. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Firstly, I'm happy to take all these questions on IOSA, but it's not meant to be an IOSA session. We'll have some other questions, I'm sure. In particular concerns you had about any individual carrier or audit organisation, I'd like to hear offline as well. Very generally, in the IOSA program, we made the decision, given the number of airlines that we would ultimately be auditing, and so far we're at over 300, that IATA being a relatively small organisation, we could not undertake to do these audits ourselves, to hire the resources. So we have accredited audit organisations to do these audits for us. There are 8 companies currently accredited. The airline can choose which audit organisation it wishes to work with. They employ over 200 auditors that are active in the field. The auditors are qualified in particular disciplines according to their experience and academic and other qualifications. They have all gone through the IOSA Auditor Training course, which is a 1-week course, and they have mandated recurrent training as well. In addition, we have continuous quality assurance programs and quality control programs which we exercise over the audit organisations. We observe audits taking place in the field. We undertake audits of the headquarters of the audit organisations, and we take action when it's necessary, including suspending audit organisations or other punitive actions. Our intention in all of these activities is not to get rid of any of the audit organisations, but to improve their performance. Is every auditor performing exactly at the level that they should? Probably not. If I'd ask any regulator in this room, is every one of your inspectors performing perfectly? The answer, of course, would be no. So it's not perfection, but we have the capability within the program that whenever we see any deterioration, that we can take steps either to recommend retraining for a particular auditor or to take action against an organisation itself.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, good afternoon. Just a question. With the, I guess we've agreed that present model for oversight is working. My question is, with the present introduction of next gen and all of the new technology that we're bringing into the system, how are states reshaping their organizations to address the technology that's coming in light of the oversight for airdromes and everything else that's happening? Or have the states actually thought about that, or have ICAO thought about maybe coming up with a model to look at this new technology that's going to be driven not so much by human errors, but humans are relying on the technology to ensure that safety remains in place. Have we looked at maybe coming up with a model to address that?
That's a very good question. And one thing when ICAO is now looking at the next process of continuous monitoring, we know right now oversight, and as was already described, oversight is going well. The industry is doing very well. But when we're talking about continuous monitoring, the reason we're raising it now, we believe that because of the points that you just raised, the technology is there, we can start to tap into this. Now, we in ICAO, for the purpose of audits, if we're thinking going continuous monitoring, and if this is endorsed by the Assembly, we're looking at launching in 2010, 2011. But that means starting to put the systems already into place. Now, having said that, I believe that continuous monitoring is the last of the steps. From then on, the only thing is it will mature. So the point that you raised, I believe that in whatever position we're in, we can launch in 2011. We can launch as of today with the data we have and however we collected it and the weaknesses we have in collection of data and analysis of data, which we can talk about later. But the point is, we can start continuous monitoring. And only in time, while we mature in our mechanisms and all stakeholders and states and the industry mature on how to share this data, will continuous monitoring just become more and more efficient in its role. But can we do it? Yes, we can. Will it get better in 15 years? Oh, for sure it will. So I just see it as that last step that can only mature.
Do you want to ask?
Yeah, I just want to add a point just to complement Mike O'Brien's answer to the gentleman from Kenya. The thing is, the industry is waiting from organizations such as ICAO and IATA to conduct the audit and to have qualified inspectors. I think there should be a more proactive approach from the industry itself to actually train its staff to understand the function of an inspector. Normally, an inspector is actually trained to actually identify the problem and be able to see the problem and highlight it and hopefully come up with a recommendation to address this problem adequately. But if the industry, I believe the industry should do the same. They don't have to be part of the 8 organizations that was actually mentioned by Mike to conduct the audit. The industry itself should educate the staff, the employees, or a group of staff to actually be IOSA or ICAO auditors. And this is exactly what we as a UAE, as a regulatory body, we are doing in terms of the ICAO audit. We are sending our inspectors to ICAO, to Montreal, to be ICAO auditors, not just only to participate in ICAO audits and to support ICAO mission, but actually to be able to identify the problems ourselves internally before the ICAO audits comes in. So I think the better approach, instead of waiting for a very highly qualified inspector to come and audit your organization, is for your organization to be able to be sufficient enough to identify the problem by itself. Just want to add the point.
I'd like to address the last question we had, if it could. From the FAA's perspective, as far as oversight workload, we are dictated by change. It's a very insidious perspective, but some think more airplanes are in the nest, or more pilots or more mechanics dictate our workload. It's actually the amount of change. And that change can be dictated by new processes, new technology. And so that's why we say that we really need to have the responsibility on industry to do the quality control of safety so that we can do the quality assurance. Because we can't keep up with that change with our own training programs and be attuned to all the morphs on the business models and the new technologies coming down. And so that's why we also have to base our oversight on risk. You have a new technology that comes into play, then what risk manifests itself? Is it new procedures that the certificate holder needs to employ? And another thing that we need to keep attuned to, and I'm going to make Bill Johnson happy, it's human factors. It's maintenance human factors, operations human factors. Looking at the training programs, are they staying up abreast with the changes in the aviation environment and staying abreast with the change in demographics, with experience levels? And are they staying abreast in terms of the nuance of human factor requirements of man-machine interface, workload, planning, communication, team building, and all the other markers we have out there. So you have to be attuned to the various risks and attuned to all the changes that occur out there so that you, again, place your resources in the best position to determine where the risks and hazards are. Otherwise, you get spread too thin, and as Bill mentioned earlier, we could be sitting here looking at a particular thing or a particular process, and something from right field is going to come in and smack us, which has happened in the past, that we have to be attuned and looking throughout for where that risk is. I got more questions if you don't. Do you have? Go ahead, Bill.
If I could make a comment on that. Are we on? Up over here. Oh, there you go. Thank you. The idea of workload and the care and feeding of the inspector force within aviation safety was one of our key focus points. You remember back in the spring when the Southwest and the American Airlines situations happened. The media, the congressional hearings, the Office of Special Counsel, we're all getting on the FAA's case big time. And I think, how many people here at least saw part of the congressional hearings back in the spring? That's
more than went to Disney World.
It's a resounding, yeah, it's a resounding majority. Now, I can tell you, we talked to about 350 aviation inspectors during our 4-month period without management in the room. So candor was not a problem. I can tell you that near 100% of the inspectors watched the hearings and watched the attention to the whistleblowers, read the media. And the interesting thing to each of us was that to a person, the aviation inspector force felt personally, professionally demeaned. What that creates, particularly back during the spring, was this quandary. If I'm an inspector, what do I do? How collaborative am I willing to be in an environment where I don't know if I've got high cover to do that? It's the same question the airline has. And for a while there was an impact on the voluntary self-disclosures, but more important, there was this question among the inspector force of how am I looked at by the public? They took the beating that Nick Sabatini got personally. Not only are they ragging on my boss, but I take that personally. And these are guys and gals that work long, long hours to try and do their job right. It was very interesting for us to see that. The other aspect, at the same time, they face a workload on a day-to-day basis in the CMOs and in the FSDOs that is complicated by information technology. And this is something we have to, I think, also wrestle with, and the FAA is taking that action as one of our recommendations. But they have ATOS, the Air Transportation Oversight System, has a pretty complex way of requiring operator inputs into that and how that all works. They have 2 or 3 other systems that are different applications, different passwords, different expiration dates. If you're in the government, and particularly in the FAA, and you try to go somewhere, to use GovTrip is a particularly onerous thing in trying to plan your trip, do your trip, do the expense report. And I can see people here smiling who have been subject to that. Logging your time for the week. Can you log the actual number of hours that you had, or can you just do 40 or whatever? So these types of things all build up to the point where whether it was just perception or reality, when we asked how much time do you spend at your computer versus the quality assurance time or the quality control time or just checking airplanes per week, 70%. They felt that they were, as one person called it, playing the piano. And that's something that was a surprise to us, and was certainly a surprise, I think, to John and his colleagues, and to their credit, they're going to take a look at that. But in a complicated environment for oversight where you're getting more and more attention to collaboration, because that has to be the way to find the precursors, to have that much time spent with a computer is something that I think the FAA does need to work with, because it does materially affect the day-to-day work life of the workforce.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And it's not lost on us, an old adage is true, that the computer system should serve you and not you serve the computer system. And so sometimes in our angst to field systems, and it's something we are addressing, we put systems out there that we forget about, again, the human factors aspect and how it really plays out in real world versus the best intentions. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Well, I think that just the language barrier that make Brazil and the US almost equal. We're sharing the same problems. I used to be a computer addict, and I think there's hope. Now I'm a BlackBerry addict. Well, what I want to share with you, and also point that we can discuss a little bit, is exactly this. We have a lot amount of data. And our computer system, the IT guys like to give password, give software, gives and everything. But we need inspectors out. They need to do their job. They don't need to be sitting in the desk looking for data. Well, how can we as regulators in the world can share our data and share the data with the IATA and other international organizations that can improve the safety and not take our inspectors from the field to keep them inside the desk looking to the computer. I'm looking for initiatives, ICAO or other countries that help us. Thanks.
We talked about that briefly, about the aspect of data versus information. And Henry or Mike, do you want to talk about that?
That's a very good question. There is, as we all know, there is a lot of data out there. The international organizations, ICAO has a vast amount of data. International organizations have a vast amount of data. Regulators have data. Certificate holders, operators have their own data. And other agencies have data. We are data rich, that we can agree, but we're still information poor. The not enough resources is put into analysis of data. And what needs to be shared is the analysis of the data. A lot of times when we discuss about sharing of data, and the first thing that comes up with data holders is confidentiality. And perhaps, like on the perspective of ICAO, we don't want raw data. You can hide the confidentiality. The point is, even if you sent us the vast amount of raw data, we don't have the resources, and I think that's just what we all suffer, is analyzing the data. So in fact, if each entity were to analyze the data on a common methodologies, very similar taxonomies and what we're looking for, and share the analysis of the data, then there's no confidentiality involved here. There would be a lot of benefit. The point that you raised, perhaps, I was trying to visualize this, and yes, you probably have inspectors end up data entry and putting information in because they've got a database where they're taking all the reports that they've received and having to sit there and they spend all day inputting. But what does that do? What does that give? And that's why you're saying it's better for them to be out in presence on the ramp or visiting the certificate holders, etc. I think it is a challenge. It is something that we should be, and it's something that is one of the biggest challenges of the continuous monitoring is the data sharing. Now, I know that ICAO did hold a meeting in September that was open to a lot of international agencies and all those who are collecting data just to tackle this one point. And how to share the analysis. One thing that ICAO took on board is to have there's a general agreement with all the key stakeholders that we will need a tool that will enable states, now I'm talking about a regulator, to augment their safety data collection, analysis, and exchange capabilities. So if ICAO can provide more guidance in that particular area, even providing a recognized tool to be used, this would go a long way.
Thanks, Henry. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, we talk a lot about data collection and data sharing, and I know we've spent a lot of time in the U.S. focusing on data collection. So we've got a lot of mature ASAP and FOCO programs. We've got a lot of other publicly available data sources, and we've, with the ASIAS program, been able to start integrating these and look not just at an individual airline's operation, but be able to look nationally at risks. And so we're starting to get over some of the data acquisition and even some of the data analysis pieces, and we're getting to a point now in our CAST environment, the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. We're at a point where we're identifying risks, and now we're getting to the next, I think, hurdle in our path, and it's how do you value the risks that you're finding? I mean, you know, in the old days it was easy because we had accidents to deal with, and we knew that if this happened, then you got an accident, and you knew what the impact of that was. So you could easily look at your safety case and decide that you needed to take some action. What we're seeing now is these risks that are floating up, and we're trying to decide, you know, is that a risk that is going to bite us somewhere down the road, and how many of those risks do you need in order to justify some investment in whatever it is, whether it's training or technology or some other solution. So we're at it's a different point in the process. We've got the data. We're I think making progress on the analysis point, but now we're trying to figure out how to balance the investment side of it with the risk side of it, and it's a lot harder when you're dealing with individual risks as opposed to a complete accident. So it's just a different challenge that's something to look forward to.
It's an interesting point about the risks. I think as you have, thank goodness, a lack of accidents, you do have to focus on the risks to determine how well we're doing. To that end, then that gives us an inclination of how our oversight model is changing for the future, and then maybe we need to look at our skill sets that we employ. We used to have it always focused on inspectors, and I know we have been successful in the FAA going to Congress and recasting our workforce where they only looked at safety professionals as inspectors, and we broadened that to all FAA employees so that we can now hire analysts. Because you might find that 1 or 2 or 3 analysts is a big force multiplier, making 3 or 4 inspectors equal to 8, 9, or 10. In other words, they provide much more capability to help the inspector do their job more effectively. So you might start looking at how you mix your employees with not just inspectors, but other skill sets to give you better capability, especially in the area of turning data to information and giving folks a better vector as to where risk and hazards might lie. It's just a perspective for the future. Okay, I've got a bunch of questions here from, yes, sir. You have my good, okay.
Good afternoon. Nary Williamson from the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority. We know that ICAO supports the regional oversight model and definitely the FAA, because they have supported us in the Caribbean in our regional approach. And we have seen the benefits of this type of approach. My question to ICAO and also to the FAA is, where do we see the future of the audit programs going? Do we see it that the regional oversight bodies are going to be audited, or will it be the member states of the oversight, the regional oversight bodies being audited?
Okay, we definitely see, and yes, we already recognize regional safety oversight organizations and the positive effects they do have, and I think it is the way in the future for many states that have the challenges of lack of resources and specialties and so on. In fact, globally, I think that's one of the critical elements that is the biggest lack of effective implementation is in that particular area. What we do see is in the continuous monitoring, we're monitoring states. So in our perspective, there's 190 contracting states. Under this new concept, they will always be monitored, all 190. In other words, you should be able to go on the website, on a secure site, and you should be able to see all 190 states, and at any given time, you click on the state, and you see the state's oversight capability live. The data can continuously change. Now, having said that, the intent is not to go audit every single state. We're moving away from that. We're monitoring continuously, but that means other entities that we would get into agreements with, that we recognize based on their establishment, who are carrying out oversight activities, will be able to provide the validated data from their performance on those particular entities that will validate the information for us in order to give credit. So yes, in essence, indirectly, it's auditing the safety oversight organizations. No, not auditing the organizations. It's more accepting and as validated data that information. Now, perhaps it may require us to visit the organization to have a better understanding and confidence in what you're doing, but we don't audit that entity. But carrying this out, we will be able to give full credit for your level of activity that you are performing to the group of states, then for us that's considered validated data, and we can post that type of information up there. So that's the way we see it. So even though right now we are performing about 40 country audits per year, we will see under the continuous monitoring that can go down to about 10 a year. So we will still perform audits to those states that need it. to those states that are not under such an umbrella with the Regional Safety Oversight Organization, that are not providing us the positive updates that we were expecting, the states that we are finding that organizationally they keep having change, they are not able to submit an action plan, an effective action plan of their previous audit. Well, they'll have to have an assistance mission, and after that, another audit going in. So that's where the focus of physical audits will continue.
One more question over here, and then I'll get some that you all have sent in.
Sir, thank you. I'd like the panel's opinion on a statement I've now heard twice during the course of today, at least twice, and how it might play into the future of regulating air travel. The statement made was, and once by the panel, is safety is the top priority, which I believe in this forum is very well accepted. However, in other aviation forums, that would be debatable, I would offer. That, as Mr. McCabe and Mr. Barimo had suggested, the safety culture within the U.S., for the most part, has improved such that many companies see safety as a key element of their overall performance, but not the top priority. And I would offer that, at least in the world that I grew up in military aviation, safety was not the top priority, mission was the priority. Safety was an important part of that mission. So I sense that safety as being the top priority still is an overriding view within our community. But is it the right view, and will it play an important part or perhaps be a barrier to how regulators perform in the future to get performance up so that safety performance continues to also increase as overall performance increases?
Go ahead, Bill.
It's an interesting question. When you look at quality assurance, would you argue that that safety goes beyond quality assurance? You know, where quality assurance doesn't totally address safety. You know, I don't know. But in some of these cases, I think it becomes what you might call a faulty dilemma, where people arbitrarily do either or. And my experience, both in the military and in DuPont, is that safety is the fishbowl in which you swim. So you don't get into a question of is profitability first or is safety first. One of the nice things that the FAA has going for it is it regulates people who have a very strong business purpose for being safe. You know, they carry people around. And I think that in itself creates an environment that generally is honored. Now, are there companies that will find reasons to have things that override safety temporarily here and there? Sure. We were heartened by the number of airline CEOs that we talked to that said, if I can't do it safely, we're just going to shut down. And the question was, as this economy is kind of going south and you have more and more problems, and back in July you had a lot of fuel price problems, what are you going to do? And one guy said flat out, if I can't do it safely, if I, as the CEO, feel I can't do it, we'll just shut down.
So consequently, I tell folks in my own parlance that we are here to enable aviation, the adventure and commerce of aviation without the compromise of safety. I don't see how you could disengage both, and yes, safety is paramount, but you have to make the call. That's why we hire experienced folks to make that call to enable the aviation, but not to compromise the safety. And you sometimes have to dig deep, and you have to really do a lot more work to find a way to make it safe. A perfect example is airworthiness directives, the lessons we learned with American Airlines, and how we found a better process in retrospect using alternative means of compliance so that safety is still upheld, but then aviation is still allowed to proceed. Where before we didn't do that digging, we would say they're grounded. And then a lot of passengers a lot of the public are inconvenienced and there wasn't any advancement to safety at all. So we're finding that we have to dig deeper, we have to work smarter, and it's not a black and white situation. Yes, safety has to be paramount in our mind because that gives us the motivation, the drive to do the best job we can and to lead safety. But again, we have to work in that gray area smarter.
Yeah, and I would just add that you know, there are experts out there at the FAA and the airlines and around the world that understand aviation safety and you know, and are the people that drive us to the record that we enjoy today. And the concern that I have is that you know, certainly here in the U.S. and I know political influences are an issue around the world, are where we shift off course because of political influence. And that's, frankly, one of our concerns here in the U.S. It's I think, a real concern because, you know, we're on the right track and we're moving in the right direction. And when you start mixing politics and safety, it pushes us off that track that we need to be on. And that's, you know, that's one of the biggest fears I think we have as airlines is that we're not able to stay focused on the things that really matter, and we get distracted. We got distracted earlier this year with a lot of the noise associated with Southwest and American Airlines, and that forced us to take our eye off the real ball momentarily, and that's where the risk is. And just to cite an example of you know, how you can get distracted. There was some legislation passed a couple of years ago in the U.S., and it required airlines, U.S. airlines, to print on their safety briefing cards that are in the cabin in the seat back where the airplane was manufactured, the country of final assembly. So airlines had to go spend time revising safety briefing cards and using safety assets. And granted, it's not a huge deal, but it's an example of how, you know, we get pushed into doing things that have absolutely nothing to do with safety, but they're under the guise of safety. So now when you fly home, you can pull the briefing card and you'll see somewhere on there, it'll say, you know, it's one of 4 places where that airplane was assembled. And that was done under the guise of safety, and I'd argue that it has absolutely nothing to do with safety. So we've got to stay focused on the real issues.
Okay, thanks, Basil. Miles?
Just to add to that point there, really is when you say safety, is it the high priority? It depends on who's actually on the beholder, exactly. Are you a regulator or are you the industry? I mean, away from the American experience, from where I come from, the number one enemy of safety is the commercial demand. We're growing extremely fast, and our carriers, they want to go, they want to cover the globe, basically. So I remember in one of the, I'm doing my master's degree right now, and one of the professors actually asked, what's the definition of safety? And we came up with all these fancy definitions, and he just said that safety equals money. So basically, safety complements the commercial requirement. It takes one accident to actually bring an entire land down. So from where I come from is the awareness of the word safety to the industry is very important. How actually the marketing people, the CEOs of an AOC holder actually perceive the word safety, and how the fact safety would actually ensure their continuity within the industry. So I think there should be a sort of a wide campaign of actually giving a better understanding of what safety and how it's actually complement the business or the economy of the country.
One of the things you might be interested in when we were talking with people outside the industry, and this came from our visits up to the Congress, there was a contention by at least one person that said he ought to be able to see by airline all the voluntary disclosures. So whether it was FOCO data, whether it was the Aviation Safety Action Program, whether it was the Voluntary Disclosure Reporting Program, that's an institutional thing by the carriers, he ought to be able to decide what airline he flies by those numbers. Now, how could you possibly use that as a reasonable metric? You don't know whether the airline has a lot of problems and never discloses, or discloses everything it does, or whatever. And one of the things we actually put on a report is something like that in such an aggregated manner should never be used as a way of making a decision. But you know, can you just imagine some person who's flying for the first time trying to use that data? The other thing, I would go back to your question. I think in the area, there is one area where the airline industry can make a marked improvement. It's got a lot of headroom, and that's in ground safety. If you take a look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look at all the occupational injuries by industry, the scheduled airline carrier has one of the highest accident or injury rates among almost everybody. Logging industry, steel mills, chemical plants, whatever. Materially higher than most. And you could make a case that the airline industry is somewhat dyslexic in its attention to flight safety and its inattention, relatively speaking, to the safety of the people who work there. Not only is that a monetary huge factor, as we've all acknowledged, but you are hurting people. So you need to be able to address that as well. There are carriers more and more, I think Basil, to the credit of your association and whatever, they're paying more attention to that right now. But that's an area where I'd say you do have a case to make.
Okay, a difference to the folks who did use the address, I'd like to just bring up a couple. We only have a little bit of time left. The first one might be for you, Henry. In a global aviation economy, is the current state-based oversight model in the ICAO convention still appropriate, or is there a need to recognize regional oversight organizations as a legitimized oversight body?
Yes, and I believe it's, I think I touched upon that earlier. The point is I believe in the current model, that's why we have to start looking forward and looking at this more of a continuous monitoring approach and give credit to other bodies that are carrying out oversight activities. It's a necessity. We have to give credit as well for other entities carrying out their forms of audits, their forms of activities, whether it's in the EC, whether it's other international entities. Share the data. Don't hoard the data, share the data. We're all talking about the same thing. We have to just now try to find a way to work together to make sure that we're talking about the same taxonomies, et cetera. But then give credit to that entity that you're expected to audit. So in other words, they don't get having too much oversight activity from one entity over another.
Thanks. Second question we had, U.S. carriers are subject to oversight from FAA via ATOS, DOD via audits, and IOSA audits if involved in international operations of code-share partnerships. These oversight processes have some similarities but also significant differences. If the intent is to have a global system, how do we coordinate these processes to improve safety but also reduce the audit load on the carriers? I think one thing we've heard with the comments on IOSA and whatnot is there is work to be done on the information derived from the audits and how we harmonize these audits. Anybody have any? Mike, do you have anything on that?
Well, I mean, the challenge that we faced with the IOSA program right from the start was making it applicable globally. Operating in hundreds of different regulatory regimes. The intention was, in the development of the standards, working with a number of key regulatory authorities, was to ensure that we didn't put forward standards that were in conflict with any existing regulation. So those standards are constantly under review. We're working very closely with as many regulatory authorities as we can. We have established already cross-reference documents between the ICAO standards, the EU Ops standards are just being done right now, and the 121 standards are also being done as a cross-reference. So when we've done that latter exercise, also that will help us to ensure that we're on board, certainly with not having any conflicts with the major regulatory standards.
Thanks, Mike. Third question is interesting, and a point I want to bring up. It says, how should we address or oversee the risk introduced by changes to the system that the system has not seen before? Something Bill referred to. And this is an example of unmanned airborne vehicles or unmanned airborne systems. One thing I'd like for you to think about is that the notion of safety is not relegated just to our own government organization or oversight body. Think about reaching out. In the case in the United States on UASs, we have to reach out to the Department of Defense, also to Homeland Security, so that we work together in terms of how we can operationalize this new technology, at the same time make sure that safety is served. And we can't do it in our own silos, in our own myopic thinking. We have to reach out and work together to affect the appropriate integration of new technologies. The same can be said for our helicopter emergency medical evacuation criteria. We need to reach out ourselves to Health and Human Services to look at the criteria that the health professionals use to dispatch these type of aircraft. So my point is that I think as a government entity, you have to look at operating and working, interacting with other government entities to best serve the safety equation and not look at it myopically. Okay, I'll move on. One's from Mike O'Brien. You've got this one many times already, Mike, so you've already answered this one. You can guess what it was. IOSA, yeah. Okay. Let's see here. This other one's on economy of audits that we had just addressed, and point taken. And I think that's obviously, when we learn from this, an issue that from an international perspective, we do probably need to have more discussion and more interaction on how we maybe streamline these audits. And then the last question I have here, in addition to the issue of regulator shopping, how should a regulator respond to a carrier complaining that a foreign airline has an economic advantage due to their regulator oversight? Oz?
I get that almost every day.
Yeah, I thought so.
Unfortunately, UAE being strategically located near Afghanistan and Iraq, we became sort of the hub for a lot of operators to come to UAE and base their operation in UAE. And yes, we do get a lot of I would say complaints from our carriers saying, where our requirements have more strict, I mean, we impose a lot of restrictions on requirement on our national carrier, which is not actually being implemented on these other charter operators that are actually being based in UAE. My approach or my answer to that question is basically we're working now on introducing a sort of a similar system as the SAFA program has, and I think the FAA 129. The foreign operators being situated in UAE. So this is my new approach or new project that I'm endeavoring. And what we are trying to do is enhance our ramp inspection program and to actually impose the annex requirements on these operators that are coming to UAE. And hopefully that would sort of introduce an equal restriction or an equal oversight on these other national carriers coming in, and similarly to the one we're actually imposing our national carrier. This is something that I'm actually working on, so I really don't have an ultimate or perfect solution to it, but it's a concern within the region.
Go ahead, Andre.
Just to add as well, ICAO also recognizes that, as you may know, up to now for state regulators, they have an obligation to carry out an oversight activity for the aircraft on their register. There was no obligation to carry out oversight activity of a foreign carrier. We always know that regulators also of resources and limited in resources and personnel, they'll prioritize and carry out surveillance activities of their own carriers. It only makes sense. ICAO came out with a new requirement, a provision that's effective as of this November, that all states' authorities will now have to start conducting oversight on a planned activity on foreign carriers. So similar to the SAFA program, et cetera, they will have to now carry out oversight activity on foreign carriers. So that should mitigate some of these concerns.
Okay, with that, we come to the end. We reached almost into your break a little bit here, so I apologize for that. So I want to thank Henry Gorgie, Bill McCabe, Mike O'Brien, Basil Barimo, and also Karjani, for your participation and an excellent discussion. And thank you very much. We'll be around if you need more questions answered. Thanks.